Matthew, I have the most unbelievable idea for your next makeover. Daniel's voice floated across the living room just as Matthew stepped through the door. He tossed his keys onto the kitchen counter, loosened his collar, and looked toward the sofa. Daniel was sitting there with a glossy fashion magazine spread across her lap, wearing the exact expression that always warned him she was about to suggest something outrageous. Matthew smiled. He knew that look. Over the past few months, Daniel had turned teasing him about his appearance into something of a hobby. What had begun as harmless jokes had gradually become one of their favorite little games. Every few weeks, she would come up with some new style experiment and watch his reaction with barely concealed amusement. "Oh, no," Matthew said, dropping onto the sofa beside her. "That expression means trouble. What have you thought of this time?" Daniel closed the magazine with exaggerated seriousness. "You." "Me." "Absolutely you." Matthew laughed. "That's not very specific." She leaned closer, studying him as though he were a model she had been hired to style. "Think about it. You're tall, you have great posture, and those shoulders give you such a strong silhouette." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "And?" Daniel's grin widened. "You'd look fantastic in a dress." He laughed immediately, but the reaction wasn't quite as effortless as he wanted it to be. Beneath the amusement, something unexpected stirred. "A dress." "A dress," Daniel repeated, as though she had just presented the most obvious idea in the world. She opened the magazine again and flipped through several pages. Not something ridiculous. Something elegant. Sophisticated. Imagine walking into a room wearing one of these. You wouldn't just enter the room, Matthew. You'd own it. He shook his head, smiling nervously. "You really have a talent for making impossible things sound reasonable." "That's because I'm right." "Obviously." "Confidence is half the outfit," she said. That comment stayed with him. Matthew had always thought of himself as comfortable in his own skin. He had never felt particularly restricted by traditional ideas about how he was supposed to dress or behave. Still, he had never actually considered testing those boundaries. Not seriously. Yet lately, the idea of experimenting with his appearance had begun to feel less absurd. Daniel noticed the thoughtful silence that followed. "Hey," she said, her voice becoming softer. "I'm teasing you, but I'm not trying to push you into anything." Matthew looked at her. "I know. If you ever want to try something different, we can. If you don't, that's completely fine too." He smiled. "That might be one of the things I love most about you. You somehow know when I'm curious about something before I even admit it." Daniel reached over and squeezed his hand. "Then maybe we don't start with a dress." Matthew looked suspiciously at her. "What do we start with?" "A manicure." He blinked. "A manicure?" "Exactly. Something simple. We could get our nails done, maybe have a facial, spend the afternoon at the spa. No big transformation. Just a little experiment." Matthew considered it. A few years earlier, he would have rejected the idea without hesitation. Now, surprisingly, he found himself smiling. "All right." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Really? Really?" She nearly bounced off the sofa. "But," Matthew added, holding up one finger, "I have a condition." Her expression immediately became cautious. "What condition?" "If this is going to be an adventure," he said, "then I get to pick your shoes." Daniel stared at him for several seconds. Then she burst into laughter. "Deal." Several hours later, the two of them wandered through the busy downtown streets after leaving an upscale spa. Matthew couldn't stop looking at his hands. His nails were neatly shaped and polished, his skin felt unusually soft, and somehow the tension that normally followed him after work had disappeared. "I hate to admit this," he said. Daniel glanced over. But I actually enjoyed it." She gave him a triumphant smile. "I told you." "You did." "And?" Matthew sighed theatrically. "You were right. Again. Don't get carried away." They continued walking, laughing about the afternoon, until Daniel suddenly slowed down. She had stopped in front of an elegant boutique. Its tall windows were filled with evening dresses, flowing skirts, delicate accessories, and carefully arranged displays that looked more like works of art than clothing. Matthew followed her gaze. "You want to go in?" Daniel shrugged. Only if you want to. He hesitated. Then he looked through the glass again. Something about the store drew him in, not just the clothes, but the possibility of discovering something about himself that he had never bothered to explore. Okay, he said. Daniel smiled. Okay. The moment they entered, Matthew was surrounded by soft music, warm lighting, and rows of colorful fabrics. A sales associate approached them. Welcome. Looking for anything in particular? Daniel answered before Matthew could. Something fun. The woman laughed. Then you've definitely come to the right place. Daniel disappeared toward one section of the boutique while Matthew wandered through another. He moved slowly between the racks, occasionally brushing his fingertips over unfamiliar materials. Silk, cotton, chiffon. He had never paid much attention to the differences before. Now every texture seemed strangely interesting. Then he saw it. A midnight blue wrap dress hung near the end of the rack. It wasn't flashy. There were no dramatic patterns or excessive decorations. It was simple, elegant, and understated. Matthew reached for it. The fabric slipped smoothly between his fingers. Without really thinking about what he was doing, he held it against himself and turned toward the mirror. The reflection looked strange. Not unpleasant. Just unfamiliar. You should try that color. Matthew turned. The sales associate was standing nearby. He glanced down at the dress. You think so? I do, she said. Midnight blue is incredibly versatile. And I think the cut would suit your frame. Matthew looked at the mirror again. For the first time that afternoon, he wasn't thinking about whether the idea was ridiculous. He was wondering what might happen if he actually tried. Across the room, Danielle emerged from another section wearing a golden sundress. The fabric moved lightly around her as she turned in front of the mirror, catching the warm boutique lighting. Matthew stared. Wow. Danielle looked over her shoulder. Wow. You look incredible. She laughed. Coming from you, I'll happily accept that. Then she noticed the dress hanging from his hands. Her smile became mischievous. Your turn. Matthew's stomach tightened. Suddenly the fitting room seemed much more intimidating than it had a moment ago. He stepped inside and pulled the curtain shut. For several seconds, he simply stood there with the dress in his hands. Until now, everything had been hypothetical. A joke. A conversation. An idea that could always be laughed away. But this was different. He could either hang the dress back on the rack and walk out, or find out what it actually felt like. Matthew took a slow breath. Then he changed. The fabric settled against him more comfortably than he expected. The wrap design followed his shape without feeling restrictive, and the sash allowed him to adjust the fit until it felt natural. He looked down. Then, slowly, he faced the mirror. His reflection stopped him. It was still him. But different. The dress softened the overall impression of his appearance without making him feel as though he had become someone else. The deep blue suited his complexion, and the clean lines gave him an unexpected elegance. Matthew stood there for a long moment. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't embarrassed. He was simply curious. Eventually, he gathered enough courage to pull the curtain aside. Danielle looked up. Her expression changed instantly. For once, she had nothing clever to say. Matthew. He shifted awkwardly. Well. She stepped closer. You look amazing. There was no teasing in her voice. That sincerity caught him completely off guard. Really? Really? She studied the dress, then him. The color is perfect. And honestly, that style suits you much better than I expected. Matthew turned toward the mirror. This time, he didn't look away. He studied the person staring back at him. The image was unfamiliar, certainly, but it no longer felt strange in the way he had expected. There was something almost liberating about seeing himself differently. Danielle stood beside him, smiling. See, she said softly. Sometimes trying something new doesn't change who you are. Matthew looked at his reflection once more. No, he said, a small smile appearing on his face. I guess it just shows you another side of who you already were. And for the first time that day, he wasn't wondering whether he should take the dress off. He was wondering what else he might be willing to try. Matthew couldn't hide his smile. You seem happier than you thought you'd be, Danielle observed. He glanced at her, considering the truth behind her words. Maybe I am. Saying it aloud surprised him. Danielle gave his arm a gentle squeeze. Then perhaps that's what matters. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Matthew looked down at the dress and laughed softly. You know what? I think I actually like this. Danielle's face lit up. I knew it. A few hours later, they stepped into one of the city's most refined restaurants, and Matthew had made a decision that still surprised him. He was keeping the dress on. Walking through the entrance, he could feel a few curious eyes following him. Strangely, though, he wasn't embarrassed. Each glance seemed to remind him of something important. He had done something outside his comfort zone, and the world hadn't ended. Danielle lifted her glass. To trying things we never expected. Matthew raised his own. To unexpected adventures. Their glasses touched. After that, the evening became remarkably ordinary. They talked. They laughed. They shared stories about the day. Gradually, Matthew stopped thinking about his clothes altogether and simply enjoyed being there. Later, Danielle studied him across the table. You know what's interesting? What? You seem different tonight. Matthew smiled. Different good or different terrible? Definitely good. She paused. You seem lighter. More relaxed. Like you're finally letting yourself enjoy something without worrying about what everyone else might think. Matthew considered that. She might have been right. What had started as a playful challenge had turned into something neither of them had expected. The dress itself wasn't the important part. Neither was the attention. The important part was that Matthew had discovered a side of himself he had spent years ignoring. He wasn't becoming another person. He was simply giving himself permission to explore. By dessert, Danielle had invented another joke. So, she said, resting her chin against her hand, your temporary fashion persona needs a name. Matthew groaned. Oh, absolutely not. Yes. No. Yes. They argued over ridiculous possibilities until Danielle suddenly snapped her fingers. Madison. Matthew stared at her. Madison. It sounds elegant. You've put approximately 3 seconds of thought into this. And yet I've achieved perfection. Matthew laughed. Fine. Madison it is. From that moment onward, Danielle insisted on calling him Madison for the rest of dinner. At first, Matthew rolled his eyes every time. Eventually, he started answering without thinking. By the time the chocolate cake arrived, the joke had become part of the evening. Danielle leaned forward. What if this isn't the end? Matthew raised an eyebrow. End of what? She gestured toward his outfit. This. The experimenting. The shopping. Trying things you've never tried before. Matthew became quiet. That morning, he would have dismissed the suggestion immediately. Now? He wasn't so certain. The day had forced him to question assumptions he'd carried for years. More importantly, it had shown him that stepping beyond familiar boundaries could be exciting rather than frightening. He finally smiled. I suppose it doesn't have to be a one-time thing. Danielle practically applauded. I knew it. You're impossible. Probably. Definitely. Their laughter followed them long after they left the restaurant. Outside, the city glittered beneath the night sky. Street lights reflected across the pavement, cars moved steadily through the avenues, and the world seemed strangely full of possibilities. For Matthew, the day hadn't transformed him into someone new. It had simply revealed possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. And as he walked beside Danielle, he found himself wondering what their next adventure might look like. The following afternoon, Danielle and Madison stood before the enormous entrance of one of the city's most luxurious department stores. Glass walls stretched several stories high, displaying designer clothing, jewelry, handbags, cosmetics, and accessories beneath brilliant lighting. Madison looked around with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Danielle, meanwhile, looked completely at home. Come on, she said, taking his arm. They moved through the store until Danielle suddenly stopped. Madison followed her gaze. The shoe department seemed endless. Rows of footwear filled the displays. Polished pumps, sparkling sandals, elegant flats, towering stilettos, and countless designs in colors he'd never imagined wearing. Danielle spread her arms theatrically. Welcome to paradise. Madison laughed. The shoe department. The heel department. He shook his head. You really have a talent for exaggeration. Wait until you see what you're trying on. Despite himself, Madison found the selection fascinating. He had rarely given women's footwear a second glance before. Now he noticed the details, the shapes, textures, materials, and subtle differences between each design. Then one pair caught his attention. Crimson stilettos. They sat beneath the display light, their glossy finish almost impossible to overlook. Madison reached toward them. They're beautiful. Danielle immediately smiled. Then try them. He looked at her. Seriously. Completely serious. A sales associate brought over the appropriate size, and moments later Madison was sitting on a bench, carefully slipping them onto his feet. The shoes fit surprisingly well. Standing was another story. He rose cautiously. His balance shifted immediately. Whoa. Danielle laughed. Easy. Madison steadied himself against the bench before taking a careful step. The added height changed his posture and balance completely. Every movement required concentration. Step by step, though, he began finding his rhythm. This, he admitted, is definitely different. Danielle nodded. But. He took another step. But I think I like it. He approached the nearest mirror. The reflection surprised him. The heels changed the way he carried himself. His posture appeared longer, more deliberate, almost graceful. He smiled. I actually love these. Danielle grinned. I knew it. For the next hour, they experimented with different styles. Black pumps. Metallic sandals. Neutral heels. Each pair created a slightly different impression. And with every attempt, Madison became more comfortable. By the time they left the shoe section, he was walking with considerably more confidence. Danielle, however, wasn't finished. Ready for the next challenge. Madison narrowed his eyes. What challenge? She pointed toward the cosmetics department. Makeup. His confidence faltered for the first time. Makeup felt different. Dresses and shoes were tangible. Makeup seemed much more personal. He had always been curious about it, but curiosity had never quite overcome his hesitation. Today, however, he had already crossed several unfamiliar boundaries. Maybe it was time to cross another. They approached a beauty counter, where a makeup artist welcomed them. How can I help? Danielle gestured toward Madison. Would like to create something memorable. The artist smiled. I think we can do that. A chair was brought forward. Madison sat down. Soon, the artist began explaining each step as she worked. Primer, foundation, concealer, powder, and carefully blended contour. Madison closed his eyes. Soft brushes moved across his face. Sponges blended each layer smoothly. The process was surprisingly relaxing. There was no rush. No pressure. Just the quiet rhythm of transformation. Nearly an hour later, the artist stepped back. Ready to see. Madison opened his eyes. The mirror turned toward him. He stopped breathing for a moment. The person looking back was unmistakably him, yet somehow completely unfamiliar. His complexion looked even and luminous. His eyes appeared more defined. Carefully shaped liner emphasized their natural shape, while subtle contouring added structure to his features. A rich shade of lipstick completed the look. Nothing about it seemed excessive. It was polished. Elegant. Confident. Madison stared. That's me. The makeup artist smiled. Of course it is. Danielle looked delighted. You look incredible. Madison couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, he understood why people described makeup as an art. It wasn't necessarily about hiding imperfections. It could be about emphasizing features, experimenting with presentation, and expressing something that words couldn't quite capture. As they walked away from the counter, Madison noticed something else. People seemed to notice him. But their attention wasn't what mattered. He felt different because he was carrying himself differently. His shoulders were straighter. His steps were steadier. His smile came more naturally. I never imagined I'd feel like this, he admitted. Danielle nodded. Most people don't realize how powerful self-expression can be. Madison thought about that. For years, uncertainty had convinced him to ignore certain interests. He had treated curiosity as something to suppress rather than explore. Now, for the first time, he didn't feel the need to apologize for being curious. Danielle slipped an arm around his shoulders. You don't have to hide those parts of yourself anymore. Madison smiled. No, he said quietly. I don't. The weeks that followed became a new chapter in their lives. What had begun as a joke gradually became a shared tradition. Weekend shopping trips turned into small adventures. Sometimes Madison preferred flowing dresses and relaxed, artistic styles. Other times, he experimented with sharper silhouettes, tailored jackets, elegant accessories, and sophisticated evening wear. There was no single style he had to follow. That was part of the freedom. Every new outfit taught him something about what he liked, and what he didn't. Their experiments eventually moved beyond clothing. They watched makeup tutorials together, practiced different techniques, and laughed whenever something went wrong. Madison discovered that he had a surprising talent for blending eyeshadow and creating precise eyeliner. Danielle, meanwhile, became remarkably skilled at contouring and highlighting. Their successes became victories. Their mistakes became stories. Slowly, Madison's confidence grew. Eventually, they began attending social gatherings dressed in styles that would once have made him nervous. Each experience reinforced the same lesson. Confidence wasn't about looking perfect. It was about feeling authentic. And every time someone called him Madison, he experienced a quiet happiness he couldn't quite explain. The name had started as a joke over dessert. Now it represented courage, curiosity, freedom, self-expression. Most importantly, Madison understood that he wasn't turning into someone else. He was simply allowing a part of himself to be seen. With Danielle beside him, that realization no longer felt frightening. It felt exciting. There would be new styles to discover, new experiences to try, and countless boundaries left to explore. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something he had to figure out. It felt like an invitation.